The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
I mean, I'll tell you, folks, the one thing that we forget on a night-to-night basis is that when LeBron James doesn't miss like 4 free throws in 6 tries, he can put up some pretty beefy fantasy lines. It's my takeaway from yesterday. Among others, there are a handful of takeaways. What's happening, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today. It's Wednesday, so happy DFS Day as well. We've got the contest coming up this evening, and I'll tell you more about that as we get a little bit deeper into the show. We, of course, have Mike Apotria set to join us in about 20 minutes. He'll break down the DFS card. He got me to a win last week. And in the words of the great Bob Barker on Happy Gilmore, you know, Nick Faldo and I won this thing last year, and I'd like to win it again. So, relying on Mike for that bad boy. What's on the docket for today? What's on the docket? Well, it's Wednesday. It's Fantasy NBA Today. I'm Dan Besbris. I think I told you all that stuff. At Dan Besbris on Twitter. Once again, want to give a massive thank you to the folks out there that continue to rate and review the podcast. You guys are driving up the numbers. It's fantastic. I love you. 2, I want to thank all the people that reached out over the last couple of days. I've sort of put out the clarion call here on the show. We are looking for blurbers at Hoopball, which is a fun word to say. It's just as fun as you think it is. We're looking for blurbers. If you don't know what the blurb feed is, and yes, I'm really overpronouncing the word to my own amusement, it's basically everything that goes out on the at Hoopball fantasy feed, but it's a little bit more than that. I don't think everything gets tweeted out. If you want to know specifically what the blurb feed is, go to hoop-ball.com, and over on the right side of the main page, you'll see the fantasy news column that just lists all the stuff, whether it's post-game notes on individual players and how they performed on a given night. You can hit the More button if you scroll down a little bit on that page, and it'll just bring up the whole blurb feed. It's all the news, injury, late scratches, subs, everything. That's what we're bringing in right now. We're looking for blurbers here at Hoopball, which is effectively the hardest job in fantasy, and it's also the starting point in fantasy. Here's why those two things actually make sense together. Why is it the starting point? Well, because if you can learn how to blurb, which to do that effectively, you need to be able to work the wire. Basically, it means you need to be able to follow all 30 teams, all of their beat writers, anybody that's putting out news about anything. You need to be able to follow all that stuff on Twitter for whatever stretch of time, 4 hours, whatever it is. And there are times in the day where not a whole lot of news is breaking. And obviously when games are happening, that's your hottest time of the day. But you need to be able to follow all that stuff and basically distill the most important things. So-and-so is questionable for this evening with an elbow injury that we didn't know about. Okay, that goes into a blurb. You say, I'm not even going to say a player because if somebody's passively listening to the podcast right now, they'll think I'm actually talking about someone. We'll call him Dan Besbris is questionable tonight with a sore right elbow. And then there's an analysis section of the blurb. So this is what's important. You need to understand what's important and how it impacts fantasy players across the landscape. As you get good at that, it becomes a whole heck of a lot easier to understand how to write an article. And that would be what this could grow into, provided everything goes well. So, if there are more of you that want to get involved, holler at me. Simple enough. At Dan Besbris on Twitter. Send me a note. I will reach out to you via direct message. We'll get into a conversation. And as I said on the last 2 shows, you don't need to have written sports before. That's why this is basically your entry-level position. You need to know how to write. You know, we can't teach you high school level writing at Hoopball, but if you can put a cogent sentence together and understand how to, you know, not write all run-on sentences and understand where commas go and stuff like that, then we can teach you how to make it work for sports. So reach out if you're interested. We'd love to have you involved. This is the big recruiting season for us at the end of the regular season because this is when we're focused on our teams right now. We're focused hard on the playoffs, but it's also a time when we're sort of gearing up for the offseason when all of this training can take place and when we can hopefully continue to expand hoop ball leading into the 2019-2020 season. That's enough opening stuff. Took too long. I'm trying to scale back, but this is important. This is big stuff. We're growing in hoop ball, and you guys are the best of the best of the best. You're listening to a fantasy basketball podcast every day. You know more than almost everybody else out there just by being piped in. Anyway, what happened on Tuesday night? A bunch of late scratches. What happened on Tuesday night? And big ones, too. Zach LaVine, he was doubtful, so not really a late scratch. Jimmy Butler scratched for rest. Derrick Rose had an elbow thing pop up. Who am I forgetting on this one? Who am I forgetting? There had to be somebody in there. Jeff Teague. That's right. Teague was a late scratch. Danilo Gallinari was a late scratch. And I think that's it. Kevin Love, we knew he wouldn't be playing. Yeah, that was your list. So, I mean, that's not a ton of names, but in 7 games to have like 4 or 5 guys pop up that we didn't know about even on Tuesday morning, that's a pretty big deal. What did it mean? Well, you guys like the fact we've been really driving hard on the streaming thing so far, and so I'll talk about the guys to me that are the toughest decisions in this mix. Jeff Teague, Derrick Rose, and Zach LaVine, of the guys that were ruled out relatively late or early/late, doesn't even really matter at this point. Those guys, to me, are the tougher decisions. Derrick Rose, and again, we're talking about a streaming situation here, so you're in a head-to-head playoff league. Derrick Rose is a drop. He was fringy as it was, more helpful in points leagues. I think he's a drop there as well. They play Thursday, Sunday, so there are a lot of guys you could grab today, Wednesday, that go Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, or Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday. Basically 3 games in 4 days, where Derrick Rose was going to have 1 game over the next 4 days. 2 over the next 5. I've already talked about how much I love the Miami Heat for this gig, because they have 3 games over the next 5 days, but they also have a whole bunch of games over the days following that. They have a 5 and 7 blended in there, and you can get in here on the early end of it, because they have so many dudes on their team that are seeing minutes. By the way, Josh Richardson, questionable for tonight's game. So if he doesn't go, that opens up a whole bunch of touches for guys like D. Wade on the farewell tour, Rodney McGruder, Dion Waiters, all these guys that in normal circumstances are just not even close to hitting the radar, top 150, top 170 kind of guys. But suddenly they have 7 games in 11 days, where a bunch of teams have 4 and 5 over that stretch, and your top 150 value becomes almost doubly valuable. He rockets inside the top 75, where your top 75 guy sees a hit because he's just not playing as much. You can do the math. Just compare and contrast. Take D. Wade, if that's the guy you're looking at, and multiply his stats by 7 games over the next 11 days. Take whatever guy you were considering dropping and how many games they have. Minnesota, for instance, has 5 games over the next 11 days. So multiply D. Rose's stats by 5. Multiply D. Wade's stats by 7. See which one works out better for you. It's not going to be an obvious thing. It really won't be. I think I'd rather have the 7 out of Wade, and especially knowing that Rose could miss another couple of games, he's done. Jeff Teague, probably the same situation. Zach LaVine is the tough one. Zach LaVine is the very tough one. They have 5 games over those same 11 days that we were just talking about. It's a little bit more backloaded. Chicago, it's really more middle loaded if I'm going to be specific about it, because they don't play today or tomorrow, and then they go Friday, Sunday, Monday. So they have a 3 and 4 mixed in there with that's a good chunk. We talked about that on yesterday's show. Go back and listen to the percentage aspect of this streaming stuff. They go Friday, Sunday, Monday, Wednesday. So it's 4 and 6 games as well. And then they have 2 games off, and they go Saturday of next week. So towards the end of that, they actually get kind of poor again. But Chicago actually has a pretty good schedule for the 6 days from Friday of this week until Wednesday of next week. So there is a spot in there where a guy like a Zach LaVine would be really helpful to have on your fantasy team, even if he only goes in 3 of those games. But he's not playing over the next 2 days. We have no word on whether or not he'll play later this week. The recent report, they've been mixed. Fantasy websites are trying to read the tea leaves, hoopball included, and the word is, hey, what's the point of playing this dude down the stretch? There's nothing to play for. Yeah, but Chicago is in that group of teams that's basically guaranteed themselves a bottom 4 record in the NBA, and by all accounts, probably a bottom 3 record, given the fact that the Hawks are 4.5 games in front of them. So it really almost doesn't matter what the Bulls do with Zach LaVine. They're not worried about losing basketball games. They did enough of that already. They're already the 4th worst record in the NBA. If they win a couple of games, they'll still be the 4th worst record. And if they lose a couple games, they'll probably still be the 4th worst record in the NBA. Because, well, I suppose they could potentially fall back behind the Cavs, but it really only changes their odds of getting that number 1 pick by 1.5%. So they're not super concerned, which creates this weird nebulous mid-zone where we don't know if they're going to bring Zach LaVine back. Here's my take. If he's healthy, he's probably going to play. I don't think they're going to do a healthy DNP with him. Is he healthy? That I don't know. Casey Johnson, who covers the Bulls, had a tweet from yesterday that said, obviously he wouldn't be playing in the game Tuesday night, but also that apparently there was progress with his knee. This is a pretty good time for there to be progress because Chicago, as you guys probably just realized, only has this one game on Tuesday that he just missed over a 4-day span. They played Sunday. LaVine sat that one out. And then just the Lakers between Sunday and Friday. So by skipping one game, he actually gets 4 days of rest. Obviously, he skipped 2 games, so it's not quite so simple. But this Lakers game was almost a done deal, no. Friday, Sunday is a big question mark. Are these 4 days going to be enough for him to get right? I think he wants to play. I think he wants to prove he can be healthy. Like I said, Bulls don't really have anything to worry about on either side of them all that much. So I don't know. I can't make a great recommendation on that. We're talking about more like a top 50 guy. If a top 50 guy is going to still get me 2 games this week, I think I'd still rather keep him. So I'm sitting on Zach LaVine unless I'm getting clobbered in my head-to-head matchup. Whereas with the Timberwolves, who don't really have any good stretch of schedule coming up. Like I said, they're Thursday, Sunday. They only have 3 games next week as well. The Bulls only have 3 games next week, but like I said, a bunch of them are front-loaded. They're Monday, Wednesday of next week. Minnesota's Tuesday, Thursday. There's no clustering of games there, so it just doesn't work from a streaming standpoint. So Minnesota is out. Chicago still has a chance for me. On the good side of the ledger, forget all these guys. I think Jimmy Butler plays on Friday. We know Kevin Love is going to come back and play. Gallo is going to come back and play in their next ball game. So that stuff I'm not too worried about. In terms of pickup stuff, we talked today about the Heat being a really good club for a pickup. Utah, they have 7 games over the next 11 days. Washington has 7 games over the next 11 days. OKC has 6 over the next 10 days, which is all right. It's not quite as good, but it's close. Utah, and they got picked clean in one of my head-to-head leagues, but that was a spot where you could probably find some dudes. It sounds like Ricky Rubio might make his return in tonight's ball game, which would push out a guy like a Royce O'Neal. So streaming with that team gets a little bit more complicated. My take on Utah is, and Washington, because most of the fringy guys are probably added in your competitive leagues, but if they're not, a guy like a Jay Crowder is a really obvious stream on Utah. With Washington, I think most of those guys are probably added, but you could probably stream a Thomas Bryant, a Jabari Parker. I would venture to guess that the whole Washington starting 5 is probably owned in your league, but if they're not, all of them would make fantastic streaming options. Those are the 3 best teams for a long-term play. If you want to go with a shorter-term play, Oklahoma City, Orlando, Utah all go back-to-back. So that brings in Orlando and Oklahoma City. But again, you're not talking about a whole bunch of extra pieces there. OKC, the big guys are owned. You're going to get Terrence Ferguson? I don't think so. So that's why I like Miami as a team you can sort of hold on to for a really long time. Or you look at a team that's more in the, call it 3 of the next 4. That brings Phoenix involved as well. Mikal Bridges, Tyler Johnson, Rashawn Holmes. It gives you a little bit more on the fringy stuff. And it also sets you up for another swap on Sunday. So that's where I sit with the streaming guys right now. I lean hard towards Miami because I think there will be more options for you there. But if your league is a little bit less competitive, Utah, Washington also make a lot of sense. Plan ahead. Those three, Miami, Utah, Washington, those are teams you can make a move, and then you can sit on it for a week and a half. You can stream a different roster slot. Funny thing is, I had all my plans set up this week to go stream a bunch of Clippers, and then they were good. They were really good. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Landry Shamet, two of the Clippers that I picked up last week, they were awesome in their back-to-back. I don't even want to move them anymore. So it almost worked out that some of these other guys ended up getting hurt. I'll stream their spot. I mean, Landry Shamet got me 6 3-pointers in this back-to-back. That's outstanding. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 27, 7, 7, and 3 with 2 3-pointers in his back-to-back. That's terrific. I mean, think about it from this perspective. Are there many guys out there that could have done either of that in one game? Think about it from that perspective. Don't think about the fact that for Shamet he averaged 11 points and 3 3-pointers, or that Gilgeous-Alexander averaged 13.5, 3.5, and 3.5. You're comparing these guys to someone who was playing 1 game or 0 games over the last 2 days, and they just blew that out of the water. I mean, if you had someone on your team that put up 27, 7, and 7 with 3 steals, that's a first-round level line. Same with Shamet, 22 points, 7 assists, 6 3-pointers. You basically got first-round value if you consider it 1 game because you used your moves last week. Oh, that almost couldn't have gone any better. I think the only other guy that, like Brandon Knight, was the unexpected hero of some of this streaming stuff. Let's break down the games a little bit. Let's jump into that before we get to Mike Apotria. New York got a big one from Emmanuel Mudiay, but I don't care. Mitchell Robinson ran into his old nemesis, foul trouble. But he still had 3 blocked shots, so he's incredible, man. Indiana, big game from Darren Collison. Miles Turner, there's something wrong with that dude right now, man. I know the defensive stats are there, but 5 for 15 shooting and 3 for 8 at the foul line. He's not quite right. Good old Thad was fine, though. Cleveland with no Kevin Love, they managed to hang in there pretty well. Colin Sexton had 26 points. He's been a little bit more efficient lately, but the rest of his stuff is really lacking. I mean, he just did nothing besides score. Chetty Osman looked pretty good in this ballgame. Brandon Knight played 26 minutes again. Wish I would have known. I mean, I did talk about it a little bit. Hey, he's looked like he was getting some more minutes, but I didn't buy it. And Love will be back in the next one. Keep an eye on Larry Nance. He's dealing with a chest contusion. And I'm betting he's getting dropped in a lot of leagues. And the Cavaliers' schedule is not magical in any way. They basically just go every other day for almost the remainder of the playoffs. But they do have games Thursday, Saturday of this week, so they still have 2 more. And they go 4 times next week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. So there might be an angle on that one if he's getting dumped. And I'm betting he is in your streaming leagues. Joel Embiid, 19 rebounds, 4 blocks. He looked pretty good in this ball game. Didn't make a ton of his shots, but appears to be fine. Ben Simmons is suddenly making free throws, which is a shame for me because I drafted him no place, and I counted on him to kill free throw percentages from my opponents. Didn't happen. Lakers foolishly won a game that they could have lost. They beat Chicago handily in the second half. KCP was the big beneficiary in this whole who's going to step up thing. Don't say I didn't warn you guys, by the way. When I said on Monday's podcast, I didn't believe in Wagner or Jonathan Williams if Kuzma comes back. And he came back, and Kuz played 33 minutes, and JaVale McGee got 33 minutes in this game. So this was like beginning of the season level JaVale McGee. LeBron, 36 and 10. He made his free throws. Oh, man, when he makes his free throws, this is what I said at the very beginning of the show. I almost feel like he's missing them on purpose, and I know that's not true. Because if he was doing that, he would have done it to lose this ball game too. Maybe this could actually be the KCP awakening now, because Josh Hart's knee tendonitis, he's just not himself. Reggie Bullock is in sort of demo mode right now, and so maybe KCP plays for a contract. He's a guy I would keep a very close watch on, because I doubt he's owned in many leagues. What's the percentage on Yahoo? 33? What are you, nuts? That's not right. I'm sure it's deep leagues. He's not owned in any 12-team leagues as far as I know, or shouldn't be. And if he is, it's because of this ball game, because he's literally done nothing for an entire season. But if all of a sudden he starts playing 30 minutes, go earn himself some money, he's got to watch, especially because the Lakers, I mean, they used up part of their decent schedule for the week today, but they go 3 times in 4 days starting on Thursday. And then their schedule gets clunky again. So if you did do a Laker pickup, if it was KCP, which he'd be the one that's not owned right now, you'd probably have to move him again on Monday of next week. And then if you wanted to, you could actually pick him back up on Friday of next week, because then they go through a little stretch of slightly better schedule. It's not amazing. It's 6-10. That's your run there. 4-6 and 6-10. But if you're looking for ways to maximize games without making a ton of moves, there are Lakers that could surface, and right now, KCP's the one that's not heavily owned. If you picked up Mo Wagner and Jonathan Williams, I think you know what to do. Robin Lopez was great again for Chicago. Wayne Selden got ejected in this ball game. He was actually playing pretty well prior to that. Ryan Arcidiacono, 14-4-6. Chris Dunn played well, which shouldn't really surprise us. He's a lot better when he's the primary ball handler and it's not Zach LaVine. Maybe he's a guy you consider swapping for. Remember, we talked about how Chicago actually has a decent schedule starting on Friday. Chris Dunn's been dropped in a lot of leagues. His ownership is down to 61%. Someone might pick him up today and sit on him for 2 off days. If that's the case, you just let him do that. But he's a guy you could certainly target on Friday morning if we get any kind of bad news on Zach LaVine between now and then. Milwaukee blew out New Orleans. It took them until the second half to do it, but eventually they got there. Anthony Davis, 21-12 with 2 blocks. He is already being considered questionable for their next ball game, which is notable, but not unexpected, because their next set is a back-to-back on Friday, Saturday. So could we see some Check Diallo? Maybe. That could be a back-to-back stream options you float out there. Frank Jackson missed a ton of shots, but he did take 18 of them. He's going to be a high-volume guy while Drew Holiday is out. We saw some tweets floating around late on Tuesday night that mentioned Drew perhaps unlikely to return this year. So if you're looking for a very short-term back-to-back, New Orleans doesn't have a particularly good schedule, but they do go 3 games in 4 days, Friday, Saturday, Monday. That's basically the only time you can utilize a Pelican in the playoffs right now. That's not a superstar, or a star at least. Their schedule stinks. Bucks are pretty predictable. Not going to dig in too deep on that one. San Antonio won in Dallas. DeMar DeRozan. A couple of big ball games for him lately after kind of a down stretch. Derek White played well, bounced back after a slow one. LMA was good. Jakob Poeltl. Remember I was talking about him as an interesting center pickup for defensive stats and field goal percent, and he did just that. 7 rebounds, 2 steals, a block. He only took 2 shots in 29 minutes, and he made them both. I got no problem with that. Not a great streaming option. Spurs' schedule isn't particularly favorable, although they do have... it gets better, maybe as the way I should phrase it. They don't play today or tomorrow, but if you're looking at a stream, they go Friday, Saturday, and then they have 4 games next week, so they're 6 games in 10 days. They also have 3 games in 4 days if you wanted to bail out and go do something different on Tuesday of next week. Or I'm actually looking at this maybe more from a roto standpoint. If you're trying to buttress a few statistical categories, he looks like an interesting name. Likewise on the other side for Jalen Brunson, who moved into the starting lineup to play shooting guard, and Tim Hardaway Jr. moved to the bench and only saw 22 minutes. THJ was already teetering in terms of being rostered. I'm hanging on because Dallas actually has a playoff schedule that, as of today, got better. If you included yesterday, or excuse me, let me watch my words here. As of yesterday, the Spurs game, I'm looking at these schedules and don't worry about it. We'll do the Ace Ventura. Let's see that in instant replay. As of Tuesday, Dallas's schedule got decent. They only played 3 games this week. Yes, that's true. They go Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. But if you have a Maverick, there's no reason to punt on him now. Yes, there are a couple of teams that could give you 3 games instead of 2 the rest of this week, but very few teams can get you what Dallas does the first 6 days of next week. Okay, so this is where you have to be judicious. So Jalen Brunson, not a terrible pickup starting tomorrow now. You pick him up tomorrow, and then they go, that's right, you guessed it, 6 games in 10 days. It's a pretty good number. It's really one and one off of what we're hunting for. Their schedule is excellent starting on Monday of next week when they go 4-6, also 3-4. But you could stretch that a little sooner if Brunson is available in your league. And old Tim Hardaway, schedule is better. As I said, I'm not using him in a roto format, but he got his 13 shots up. His usage was high off the bench, so I'm not going to bail on him yet. And then Portland. Oh, excuse me, there's 2 games left. Denver blew out Minnesota, and Portland blew out the Clippers late. CJ McCollum got white hot. He scored 30 points in the second half. He and Damian Lillard put up big lines. Enes Kanter looked a lot better in this game, 14 and 9, a steal and a block. Yusuf Nurkic was good. Al-Farouq Aminu was not so great. They didn't need him. Guys like Seth Curry, Jake Layman ended up chewing up some extra minutes off the bench. Mo Harkless had 3 blocks. I don't know. I didn't think anything was all that interesting in this game. We were obviously watching the Clippers because we had all these streaming guys on it, and Gilgeous-Alexander and Landry Shamet were both solid. Patrick Beverley continues to do his weird low-usage thing. No Gallo. That is a big reason why other guys had to try to step up in this game, and they just got worked over by a good Blazers team and a Clippers team on a back-to-back. Not making any big adjustments. Karl Anthony Towns, he's such a warrior. God, man, there was this weird... This is why I hate when people just jump straight to shutdown. He doesn't like shutting down. Towns is very anti-shutdown. He had 34 and 10 with 3 blocks. His team got smoked because he had no help. No Rose, no Wiggins, no Covington, no Teague. His entire starting lineup was out. And everybody else was terrible except for Tyus Jones, who could find his way into a nice role, but that's more of a roto team right now. Minnesota's playoff schedule is wiggity whack unless your league goes to the very end of the regular season. Anything you're doing with the Wolves is built on the premise of the starters, the good guys, getting healthy again, or squeezing in a stream in a roto situation. And then with Denver, Jamal Murray had a big game. I would say long overdue. He's had a tough year. Monty Morris played well off the bench. Millsap, Jokic were good, and then Gary Harris was Mason Plumlee, by the way, your weird middling center. If you're not too worried about free throw percent, he's out there. Malik Beasley was not so great in this ball game. Will Barton was bad again. A lot of mouths to feed in Denver these days, guys. It worries me. I still think that it's Jokic, Millsap, Murray, and Barton. But today we saw Monty Morris get hot, and so Barton disappeared. That's a real worry. That's enough of that. Enough of season-long stuff. We're going to talk about tonight's games with Mike Apotria. We'll talk DFS. We'll also talk about what that means from a season-long standpoint. We got our streaming stuff covered. We got our recruit stuff covered. I think we're ready to talk DFS contest. By the way, come join us in the contest. $3 to enter, $375 in prizes. Top 20 get payout. And even I won last week. If I can do it, you clowns can. If you don't know how to do it, tweet at us, at Dan Besbris, at Mike Apotria, at Hoopball Fantasy. Any one of those will work. We'll let you know how to get involved. We're also sending out an email every week on the contest. Turnout has basically leveled off, and that's not surprising because it's March, so there aren't really any new people getting into the NBA right now. But come join us. And frankly, and this is the hush part of the whole thing, so I'll do it in an NPR voice. It's $375 in prizes regardless of how many people are in the contest. Shh, don't tell anybody. Meaning, if there are 10 people in there, everybody wins. You don't even have to play. If there are 80 people in there, you only have to beat 60 people to place in the top 20. It's actually better if it's not totally maxed out. It's probably the only reason I won last week is because there were like 95 people instead of 125. And so I had to beat 75 instead of 105. And I won. I won money. I feel like that guy at the end of Vegas Vacation. I won the money. Come join us. Come join us. Anyway, let's find out how we're going to do it, because without Mike, I certainly wouldn't have had like half of my roster last week. I I rode the Apotria coattails to victory. Let's bring him in. Onto the show. Our buddy from the East Coast, the Eastern Standard Time. I'm not going to screw up what time of day it is for Mike Apotria. Good afternoon to you, Mike.
Good morning, Dan.
Thank you.
We finally got this right. It's good everywhere, though. You know, it's Wednesday. It's our favorite day of the week. You know, I'm ready for it. I know you're ready for it. I believe you're probably a little bit more ready for it after.
Hell yeah.
I believe you cashed last week, right?
That's
Dan?
right. That's right. Damn it. I cashed last week. I'm filled with piss and vinegar now. I'm talking trash. The whole thing is happening. I'm definitely going to lose this week, by the way. There's almost zero question that I cannot back up my trash talk with an additional win. But it was fun. That was actually my last $3 from the, I think I won a $30 prize on like the second week of the year we did this contest, and I had played some 10. I think I missed one or two in there. My laptop died, and then one week I think I just forgot to sign up. So I was in like 11 of the next 13 weeks, and I lost all of them until last week. So I'm back, baby. I got my 1875 ready to go, and I'm ready to stride to victory. I won last week with, I think I was in 11th place, 310 and a quarter. And you beat me. You couldn't even let me have my cash without beating me, Mike. You were 317 and a quarter with your big lineup. So let's talk a little bit about last week. We'll go with mine first because I came in just a little bit behind you. We had a lot of overlap because I used a bunch of the guys that you mentioned on the show from last week. Rajon Rondo was one of them. Derek White was one of them. Ben Simmons was one of them. I'm trying to think of who else. Kevin Love was one of them. These were all names that you said on last week's podcast, and I used, how many did I just say? All four of those guys. I think the only one I didn't use that you gave out was JaVale McGee, and he ended up being a really nice bargain player as well. So those five guys, Mike, that you gave out on the pod were a rousing success. Let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, these were guys I was high on going into the night. You know, sometimes everything comes full circle, and you get a combination of good matchup, good pace, good DVP in general. And when all those things, you know, combined, it was hard for me to get off these guys too. And you know, you have these slates where there's kind of, you know, those free squares we talk about. We didn't have any direct free squares. We know we had Rozier get ruled in real quick. A lot of people were going to jump on that, but we've seen a couple times in the past with playing Rozier. Sometimes it's Hayward or Jaylen Brown on that night instead of him. And McGee was pretty close to a free square for me at his price, knowing that they needed his size, that he was going to play at least 24 minutes. I think he was 3,700. But I think overall it was just a good night, and I was happy. I cashed in a few bigger tournaments, and I had a great night. I loved it. I wish I had my big money. I had a big money contest. I did pretty well, and I didn't have that lineup in this contest. I never picked the right lineups for this contest. It's going to be my downfall, I swear. But it put up a good solid, like 355, I believe. I had a big one.
Damn. Yeah, that's a big one. Well, that would have won this contest by 22 over the second place team if you had played that one in the hoop ball contest. And overall, I thought people actually did relatively well in this thing. You needed to hit 300 to cash. The other name, by the way, I forgot to mention, Alex Len was another one you gave out on the pod last week, and he was solid if unspectacular, I think is the rating I think we can give him effectively in that one. But you and I both, we didn't have the exact same lineup. We had a few spots where we diverged from one another. We had 5 players of overlap, but the 3 players you had that I did not have were JaVale McGee, who, again, you gave out on the podcast, Luka Doncic, who went huge, who, by the way, you did mention on the podcast. I just didn't end up going with him. And Jaylen Brown, who was basically the only guy in your lineup that didn't just crush like a monster. The 3 guys I went with where we didn't overlap were Justice Winslow, who turned out to be okay. He was a super low-owned guy. I thought maybe I could sort of sneak away from the group. Terry Rozier, who you said was, you know, basically like a free square, and he was fine. And then Jamal Murray. I figured he was going to dunk on the Lakers. There's this weird Lakers-Jamal Murray thing, and he was fine. He wasn't terrific or anything, but he put up enough with considering how well a lot of the other guys did in the lineup. It was hard to really screw up the lineup last week was how I found. There weren't a ton of guys that went way under. Just looking at some of the other lineups in our league, Tobias Harris was one that tanked a few teams last week. Let's see who else was way under the mark. I mean, there just weren't that many obvious misses from last week. You had to kind of get a little bit unlucky to hit on one of those guys.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, it really depends on the volumes of the lineups you're putting in. So I had tons of Harris. I try to be as transparent as possible. I was high on Harris. I had a ton of them. But like I always mention, I never 100% anybody. I try not to. It'll sink all your teams if you do that. And as good of a spot as Harris was in, he busted. And, Dan, give yourself a little bit more credit with that Jamal Murray pick. That was a good one. 4.7% owned, 35.5 DraftKings points. He's only 6,200. That was a good play right there.
Yeah, decent. That was a decent play. He went a little bit over his 5X. He did what he needed to do. I figured there was almost no chance he was going to wet himself. And I thought, you know what? All right, this solid floor. There's some upside here if the whole Lakers Jamal Murray thing starts to kick into high gear. A few other names, by the way, that I'm scrolling down the list to find out how guys did that maybe were a little bit overpriced. Blake Griffin had a slow night last Wednesday. Josh Richardson had a slow night. I think folks were counting on Derrick Rose, and he didn't do much of anything last Wednesday as well. Let's see who else jumps out as potential sinkage. I mean, obviously Kyrie Irving was a late scratch, but hopefully folks were able to get him out of their lineup. I mean, that's really like Lauri Markkanen ended up being kind of a quiet one. I know you and I had talked about maybe throwing him into a lineup. I ended up eventually backing off, figuring that he would struggle against generally, I think it was going to be Ben Simmons. Simmons probably playing power forward. So there were a handful of names. It was cool to win, but it was, I'll admit, given the fact that you gave me 5 or 6 names I could play to get started, and they basically all worked, I would have had to work pretty hard to screw it up. I mean, I just had to pick 3 guys that did fine or better, and so I was able to bungle my way into that one. Let's talk about this week. I don't know that there's any overarching lessons to take away from last week. You're looking for values. You're looking for, different lineups at this time of the year. What do we know about tonight's card? Get us situated here, Mike. Give me the broad overview.
So the biggest thing I have to stress and put importance on, I would have to say, is the slate itself. It's not a normal Wednesday. We have 6 games. Normally on Wednesdays, we're looking at 9, 10, 11, or 12. Our player pools are generally a lot bigger. There's usually a lot more value, and there's a lot, more fluctuation. So it's a little bit more cut and dry today. Unless we hear some major news break, we don't have a ton of value. I think right before we started this, they ruled Aaron Gordon in. He's going to play, and I kind of saw that coming with it being the importance of the game. Both teams need to win right now, both trying to fight for a spot in the Eastern Conference. So it's pretty cut and dry. I say 6 games. I'm generally going to get a lot of my exposure from 3 of these games in particular. And then the other maybe 2 games will be one-offs, and 1 game I'm probably not even going to touch. And you could probably tell just by looking at some of the over-unders and the spreads which way I'm going to be going with that. And then it's really lowering your player pool. Like I said, there's only 6 games, so we can't play everybody. You have to take a stance on some guys who might even be 30 or 40% owned. But that's your stance. You have to take that because there's going to be a little bit of overlap when there's only 6 games.
So how do you do that? I mean, this is kind of uncharted territory for me personally, getting into a contest on a low game total day. How do you pick where you go with the grain and where you go against it?
So
that's a hard question, by the way. That's a broad question I just hit you with.
No, it's okay. I'll tackle it. Generally, if you're playing in a mass field tournament where there's 40,000 people, the best spot to go against the grain is in ownership. When you see a guy hedging towards 50 to 60, 40% ownership, something absurd, and there's somebody else relatively near their price range. Like for instance, let's just say Harden was expected to be 50% owned and Westbrook was supposed to only be 20%. That's not going to be the case on this slate. But that's an immediate hedge right there. You just go for Westbrook and just hope that he outscores Harden, and then you beat 50% of the field that way. On tonight's slate, I think it's just going to be trying to avoid the bad games and just basically hit on the games that we think could stay close. They're going to have good totals. I don't see really any real reason to play too much Miami and Detroit. It's the lowest total on the board. We don't have a ton of value, and we generally, with the Detroit side, we know where the points are coming from with these 2 guys. It's going to be Drummond and it's going to be Griffin. Those are the only 2 guys I would even think about. And then if I have to start eliminating guys from my player pool that I'm not interested in, well, it's going to probably be in this game. And those are 2 guys I'm hoping a lot of people want to play a little bit. But I'd rather use my center position elsewhere than Drummond. As good as he is, I wouldn't be shocked if he has a good game, but I would just rather use my center position elsewhere. And I think at power forward, I see a clear-cut option that for cheaper than Blake Griffin that I'd much rather go to as well. So it kind of helps me eliminating, even if they're star stud players who, don't get me wrong, they could do good on any given night. But I can easily get those guys out of my player pool, and I don't really need to worry about them. And you know what? If they go out there and they put up 40, 45 points, that still doesn't sink me. As long as the guys I played still do as good as I think they're going to do.
Okay, so where are we starting on tonight's card? Let's start to build something. All
right, we'll start right with Orlando, Washington. I mean, it's going to be one of the first games that tip off. It's like I said, two teams that are going to be highly competitive. So I think we can expect a little bit of shortened rotations. We're going to see the starters probably play as many minutes as they can handle. They both need to win this game. Guys like Satoransky have been playing 35, 36, 37, 38 minutes over the past 4 or 5 games. Same thing with Bradley Beal. So those are the two main targets I'd probably be looking at on the Washington side. Jabari Parker, you can always look at too. He's definitely a tournament play in his own rights. Some days we've seen him get 8 DraftKings points, other days he gets 40. But I'm a little bit more inclined to feel a little safer about him given how important this game is and Orlando's size that they do play with. So on the other side, Vucevic, he's probably one of my number one plays on the day. He's 9,200. Washington cannot rebound. This is going to be a fast-paced game for Orlando. They're playing in a pace-up spot, and it's got a 225.5 game total. He's their best scorer. He's their go-to guy. So on that side, I'd probably be looking. I was really, really hoping Aaron Gordon would be ruled out. Not as far as for our season longs, but it would have given a big boost to Terrence Ross and Isaac, who I still think are in play. Given that we do not have a ton of value, these guys are 49 and 5K, up pace tempo. Ross is the clear go-to bench scorer. If he gets hot, he gets hot. So, and that small forward position is not really too enticing either. So both those guys are eligible there. So I do think they're in play. But if you're going to go playing a bunch of guys from Orlando, you don't want to invest playing both those guys with Vucevic and Gord. It's a little bit too much. So I would probably say maybe look at most 2 guys on each side of the ball in this game because it's going to be a good one. Vucevic being my favorite play for Orlando and in the game overall, though.
I know that I've asked these harebrained questions before, so I'm not going to ask the same one, but I am going to ask a sort of a corollary to it. You've said on this pod that you generally like to max out at 4 players in one game. Because I've asked, hey, would you ever play like all 8 guys from one game? Just hope that it's like a crazy double overtime game, and that's how you separate yourself from the pack in like a mass contest, as you mass field. I think I'm saying right. Is that the right lingo?
Yeah, okay. You got look at you, DFS guy winning last week and getting the lingo.
Yeah,
down.
that's right, everybody. I'm coming for you. So if you're only doing 4 in a game on a short card like this one, it's only 6 games on this Wednesday. Would you go 4 and 4 and just try to load up on 2 games? And I know it's again, it obviously maximizes risk, but it also maximizes reward because if you hit on the 2 games that, you pick 2 games out of the 6 that are the high scoring ones, you could just sort of guarantee yourself a win. It feels like if you pick a guy in every one of these games, you have to really get lucky a little bit more than usual on a short card like this because the options are a bit more limited.
Absolutely. You could game stack. It's definitely a theory, and a lot of people do it when they're running out a ton of lineups because they're not worried about shooting themselves in the foot in 5 or 10 of them just because they're running out 150. So they have other lineups where they're not game stacking if they are doing that, and it kind of gives them a safety net in case this game does go to double overtime, like you said. We've seen that happen. Generally, if you're only trotting out 1 or 2 in a contest like this, I wouldn't recommend it because how often do we know a game's going to go to double overtime? Yeah. And if it doesn't, you're pretty much sinking yourself right off the rip. Even if this game's a high-scoring game that stays close, we probably have 2 or 3 other games on the slate that could be high-scoring games that stay close. So some of the advantages could be, getting the 1 or 2 guys off of each of those high-scoring games that stay close teams. So if you can go and get, a guy like Aaron Gordon or Vucevic, who's the highest scorer for Orlando, goes out there, let's say one of them puts up 20 and 15. And then you get on the other side, Satoransky has a great game, and he's probably not going to finish better than Beal, but allows you to get exposure on the other side where you didn't have to spend a combined $18,000 on 2 positions. And then also go and target some of the Golden State or Houston guys or somebody over on OKC or Memphis. It allows you to spread it out a little bit more. If you kind of just stack direct, like you said, 4-4, it really has to come down to price. Because if you're stacking, you want to try to get the highest scoring players in those games. So if you're looking to play the highest scoring players in Golden State and Houston, let's say, you're looking at spending up on Curry, Thompson, Cousins, and on the other side, you're looking up at Capella, Harden, Paul. It's going to be hard to stick Vucevic and, let's say, Beal, the two highest projected scorer guys in that game, and afford those other guys as well. So that's where it kind of comes to, maybe playing an Isaac over Beal. And then it still allows you to have a little bit of money to go chase over on Curry or Thompson, or if you want to play George or Westbrook. So that's kind of what I mean. I like to play 2 and 2, and I'm going to probably run several lineups in this. And I would say I feel comfortable playing 2 from each side in Washington and Orlando, but that doesn't necessarily mean I will. It really comes down to construction. I feel the most comfortable with, I would say Vucevic and Gordon. If I wasn't playing Vucevic, maybe I'd go to Gordon. He was a little bit banged up. He hurt his ribs. But like I said, they need to win this game, and he's going to be pressed for minutes. And Orlando's the team that's in the real pace-up spot here. It's going to be a high-scoring game anyway. But we can't forget Orlando's defense is real. They have a really good defense. Washington is, yes, they play up in pace, but that's better for Orlando, not necessarily them. So I'm going to have exposure on the other side, but I'm really realistically, I'll probably have 2 guys in this game in my lineup, I would think.
Where are your cheapo guys coming from today?
Ooh, cheapo guys. So like I said, I mentioned a couple of them in that one game, being Isaac and Ross. I would have liked the news to fall better, but I still think that they're in play. My favorite cheapo play, though, and it's not even that cheap. Like I said, I don't think we have a ton of value, but it's hopping over on that Memphis-Atlanta game. It'd be Avery Bradley. It's a pace-up spot. Avery Bradley's he's taking shots again. This isn't the Avery Bradley that was playing for Doc Rivers on the Clippers. This is a different Avery Bradley we're seeing right now. He's playing big minutes, 35, 34, 36, 37. In the shot attempts, 17, 14, 19, and 3 out of his last 4.
Yeah, he's cheap. He's surprisingly cheap, given the fact that most of the time lately he's been pretty involved.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And it's kind of, the algorithm just didn't quite catch up to him. And I'd say one more big game, and it will. And now he would probably see a price boost of 55, 5,600, and we have to actually start thinking about it. But this just seems like it's a pretty much plug and play for me. It's Atlanta. They play in a pace-up spot. The best spot to go against them is on the wing. And this is a spot where I'm going to get some of my value. So I know I want to get exposure to this game. And if I do love Conley, I think Conley's in a great spot if they're going to keep running him 35 minutes. But if I wanted to spend up and use that 7,800 somewhere else in, let's say that Washington OKC side or the Houston Golden State game, one of those, then Bradley's the perfect guy to still get exposure on Memphis side and not have to pay a lot for it.
I know you said you weren't really interested in the Miami-Detroit game. With Miami's weird rotations lately, has that created any small value, like a Bam Adebayo playing bigger minutes, Dwayne Wade farewell tour? I know Josh Richardson, I believe the last we heard, he's questionable for today. So if he gets ruled out, would that force you to rethink Miami a little bit? Basically what I'm saying is, I see some guys that are relatively cheap on the Heat. Do any of them sneak into your radar a little bit?
When it comes down to filling out that last spot and you have a certain amount and you just love everybody else in your lineup, that's when they kind of come into play for me.
Okay.
They're playing a little, I wouldn't be shocked. Somebody's going to hit value. At least one of these wings is going to hit value. Probably one of the bigs too, I'd assume. But which one? It's hard to peg it with these guys. They're chopping up minutes all different ways. Dragic's actually playing again. Now Richardson's going out. It could be Magruder, it could be Derek Jones Jr. all of a sudden getting a few extra minutes. They might want to play Wade a couple more on the farewell tour, but it's also a home game. So it can. I feel like it can go any different way. And so for that reason, I just feel like there's a lot of volatility, but there's not the high total worth the volatility for me. So they're going to be low owned guys. You could definitely look at one guy. I'm just keeping my eye out. I wouldn't recommend him any way, shape, or form unless you're playing tons of teams and tournaments. I'm keeping an eye on Goran Dragic. This is like a game that Miami wants to win. Detroit and Miami are very close in the standings. And then, like we said before, we still have the Orlando, Washington guys creeping up as well. So it's a game that they want to win. And he came back. He's played increased minutes the past 2 games, 15, I believe, and then 21. If for any reason we hear that that's going to get bumped up to maybe 25, 24, well, I think he comes into play at only 4,500 DraftKings points. Because like I said, we do not have a ton of value on this slate to really go by. Very, very risky, but if the news just falls and we hear it, I think it's a way we can go. If we don't hear anything about it, I probably won't touch it. It's just a little too shaky for me, but it's something to keep an eye on.
Are there enough?
Other than that, I'm not.
I mean, this is the thing I'm running into as I look at this card. Are there enough affordable guys that would actually allow you to get one of the high-priced superstars? This feels like a card that's now starting to lean more towards a whole bunch of guys between 5,000 and 9,000 jammed together, as opposed to like some 4s and 10s added in.
Well, that's the thing, and that's kind of where I'm coming with my construction. Is I'm having a tough time getting up to Westbrook, and I'm getting up to Harden. I'm liking this mid tier a little too much. I mean, in a few later games, like I mentioned, the cheapies. Cheapies doesn't necessarily is not the only thing for value. We have tons of value in this mid tier range. One of my favorite plays of the day is Chris Paul. 6,900 is absurdly cheap for Chris Paul in this matchup. It's a pace up matchup for Houston. Should be a close game. Both these teams are very competitive. They love playing each other. Chris Paul gets up in these matchups. I believe these guys played 2 times already this year. Chris Paul played 32 minutes. He's averaging 16 points, 12 rebounds, or 12 assists, 5 rebounds for 48 DraftKings points. If you're telling me I can even get 40 out of them at 6,900 and get exposure to that game, that's great. So I think we do have some other value. You got Klay Thompson in that game at 72, another good mid-tier guy.
Cousins no Kevin Durant, too. KD out obviously changes the equation for Golden State a little bit.
Oh, 100%. I think Klay Thompson sees a usage bump of like almost 10 with KD off the court, and he averages an extra 0.22 DraftKings points per minute, and he's been hot. He's a very, very scoring-reliant player, but when he's hot, he's hot. And this guy's shooting. He's hot. They're going to need him to score tonight. Cousins is another guy. He's going to see a big uptick. Curry, of course, too. So all three of these guys. And, when you're looking at Curry at 9,300, no Durant, and going against Harden, it kind of makes it hard to argue against. So Harden always has that upside. Again, you always hear me say this. I'm never going to tell you not to play these guys, but it's just not the route I'm taking. I don't want to play Harden tonight. I'd much rather play Chris Paul, get some exposure maybe with either Cousins or Klay Thompson and a little Curry here and there on the other side.
Would you rather have one of those guys you just mentioned or Vooch? Because you said you really liked him in that first game we talked about.
Well, I can give you a hint right now. In my initial build that I made so far, it has Chris Paul, Vooch, and Klay Thompson.
Oh, look at that. You got them all in there.
I have all three of those guys in there.
Holy smokes.
And it's really not that hard. And I can even get some other guys in there too. With just if I start my lineup off with Chris Paul, Avery Bradley, Vucevic, Klay Thompson, it still leaves me almost 5,500 for my other spots. And I can tell you right now, I've already got a good shell where there might be a guy named John Collins in there as well, who I really like tonight at power forward.
Goodness.
Power forward is a very weak position in my opinion tonight, and I think spending up 7,600, Memphis stinks against power forwards. Collins is going to be their guy. I don't see why he doesn't crush. And even if he doesn't absolutely crush, I think point per dollar at the position, he's going to be valuable.
And where's he at? He's 7,600?
He's 7,600.
Man.
There's a couple. See, that's where the Isaacs start coming into play. Your Jay Crowder start coming into play. These guys that are floating around that 5K range. We don't necessarily have that 3,500 guy that we can just plug in there. So when you start looking at that 3,500 range, we're looking at guys like Justin Holiday and Derrick Jones Jr. And that's where I kind of said, if you need to go down there, that's where the Miami guys kind of come into play because it's a dart throw. If you're playing Magruder or Derrick Jones Jr., it's because you have a stacked out lineup where you're feeling great about everybody else. And then you're taking a dart throw and hoping that, Richardson misses and one of these guys sees 28 minutes and that even gets hot. And that could happen. But probability-wise, if you're only making one lineup, are you willing to put it all on that? Not me.
What about DeLon Wright? He's been playing a little bit better for Memphis. Even with Conley and Bradley in, he's been seeing 26 or more minutes.
He's definitely in play. He's another one of my value plays. He especially correlates in Conley-less lineups because he's going to play a lot of the one if Conley decides that he gets into foul trouble. They want to play him 27 minutes, blowout, anything like that. He's safe. So I definitely have some love in him for him as well. I mean, there's a few other guys that are creeping around that 5K range that we could talk about, but it's just how comfortable do you feel about them compared to everybody else in the slate? All those guys, the Atlanta Wings, it's kind of almost another similar situation in Miami. They're chopping up these minutes left and right. We really don't know who's going to be playing 30 minutes. They're kind of all playing around 28. But at that same point, that's what makes guys decent tournament plays, because not a lot of people are going to be high on them. They're right in that mid-tier range. And if you hit the one that does play 32 minutes, you're probably going to be looking at least, 25 to 30 DraftKings points at 5K, which is valuable on this slate.
Well, I'm all sorts of twisted, Mike. I'm all twisted up. Oh, well, I'll figure this thing out. I'm looking at this group of guys between 4,400 and 5,300, and it's going to be – there's a very real chance that there are actual full-size tangible darts in my computer screen when this day is done, because I think I might just blindfold myself and say, Torian Prince. And then we're in. I'm gonna end up with way too many guys in that Memphis-Atlanta game just by accident.
That's okay. That's not a bad thing. It's just knowing which side you want to target. It's kind of like a similar situation I said with Washington-Orlando. Yes, this is a pace-up spot with a high total, but which team is playing at the higher pace? It's going to be Memphis. Memphis is playing at an increased pace because of Atlanta. So that means Memphis's average scoring total is going to be higher today than what their season average would be. So if you're looking to get a lot of exposure in that game, that's kind of why I said my favorite player is Collins. And then, again, taking the high-price guy on one side and going with the value on the other side, I think is the route I'm going to take. And I think it'd be criminal not to mention Joakim Noah in this matchup as well. 4,700 off the bench, 24 minutes. We've seen him get 35 points in worse matchups. So he's definitely a guy that is going to be on my radar as well.
All right. The marvelous Mike Apotria trying to keep Dan from losing his mind as I go for 2 in a row. I am not super confident that I'm going to pick the right guys in that 5K range, but I'm going to give it my damn best, and we'll see how it goes. Everybody else, get into the contest. Come join us. $3 entry. You can enter as many as 3 times. 125 slots open. $375 cash on the line. And, of course, bonus prizes. First place takes home a hoop ball t-shirt. Second place gets a coffee goodie bag from Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company. Mike, you good and coffeed up this morning?
Oh, I'm running low, actually. I'm running low.
You better win.
If I don't tonight, it's going to be a fat order for me tomorrow.
There you
I
go.
already said it.
There you go.
They're gonna be getting a good chunk of my money. I have to invest. When I buy coffee, you don't want to sit there and have to order a pack of K cups a week.
No.
Just get it in bulk. I sit on that stuff, and I drink it too much.
That's right. Line up the bags.
They have a lifetime subscriber with me.
Line up the bags in the kitchen. It's go time. And Mike doesn't sleep, by the way, so he really does need an awful lot of coffee. You guys should check it out as well. HawaiianIsles.com is the website. At HI Kona Coffee on Twitter, or you can get them on Amazon Prime by searching for Hawaiian Isles, and it'll pop right up. They're Amazon's Choice, one of the flavors. I forget which one. I looked it up last week. Mike, as always, a pleasure, my good man. Good luck to you. Good luck to me. I'll talk to you in a week.
All right, then. Thank you.
That was Mike Apotria. He is marvelous. He is magical. He is the man, and he's trying to talk me through this thing. He's trying to talk me off a ledge as I build my lineup. A couple of spots where I'm getting log jammed is Klay Thompson, because he doesn't do much besides score. So if he doesn't hit a bunch of shots, that one could come down the tubes. Terrence Ross is another one that frightens me a little bit. Again, it's all about the scoring stuff, but it is a really good matchup, and he fits the bill at 4,900. You only need 25 to 30 points at him to make this thing work with all the guys that are potentially going big on this night. So we'll see how it goes. That's the guys I'm throwing in right now. Based on everything that he just told me, I have 7 of my 8 guys in a lineup that includes Bradley, Thompson, Ross, Collins, Vooch, Chris Paul, Delon Wright, and then I'm sitting on $4,800. So it's probably going to come down to someone like a Joakim Noah or a Rodions Kurucs or a Joe Harris or a Goran Dragic, if, as Mike said, if I want to roll the dice a little bit. Or if I could find a way to save a couple bucks, I'm only 200 away from Jonathan Isaac, 300 away from Kenneth Faried, 300 away from Eric Gordon. There's some guys within reach, but I'd have to downgrade one of these other dudes, and I just don't know if I want to do it. Come join us in the contest. Have some fun. We'll see how this bad boy goes. For Mike Apotria, I am Dan Besbris. This was DFS Wednesday on Fantasy NBA Today. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Half-Length Thursday. You know how it goes. Mostly streaming right now. Brew on Friday to wrap up the week here on the pod. We will talk to you tomorrow. So long, everybody.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.